Hello everyone, my name is Manolis Spinorilakis, the founder and producer of Reality Crowd TV, and welcome to a very special episode of Reality Crowd TV's Crowdfunding Hangouts, Crowdfunding for Equity, with the Soho Loft Venture Capital and Angel Events organization and their founder, David Drake. Before I introduce David to the audience, I just want to make sure that we set a few ground rules down. As always, we have a Q&A application that will be live throughout the show, so if anyone has any questions about equity crowdfunding, venture capital, or angel investing, you could feel free to use the question and answer application done through the Google Plus event. Additionally, there'll be ways to connect with David Drake and Reality Crowd TV within the event invitation and the event copy, so if you'd like to register for any of the events that we may be speaking about or get further information on equity crowdfunding, all of that will be available to you right in the event description. So once again, we encourage everyone to ask questions because equity crowdfunding is a bit of a newer topic here in the United States and around the world. And without further ado, I will introduce to you all our great guest today, David Drake. So David Drake is the leading equity expert based in New York. He is the founder and chairman of LDJ Capital, a private equity advisory firm, and of the Soho Loft, an event-driven global financial media company. Born in Sweden and fluent in 6 languages, Mr. Drake is a strong advocate of innovative investing in early-stage equity in the U.S. Jobs Act, for which he lobbied both in Congress and in the European Union Commission. Because of his leading work in this space, he was a U.S. Commerce Department delegate to the European Union Commission in Brussels and Rome, and was invited in May of 2013 to the White House. He is a champion of change, and he was in the Champions of Change ceremony in Washington, D.C. So without further ado, I would love to introduce to everyone David Drake from Soho Loft Events. Thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you, Manolis. Thanks for having me here on the show.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you. I know you travel the world, and you were recently in Asia just yesterday. So we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And so just give us a little bit more background about yourself. Tell us a little bit about LDJ Capital and about Soho Loft Events, just to give the audience a background, and then we can dig deeper into the actual topics of today's webinar.
Well, we're trying to put together events on several times a month in 2011, which was election year in the U.S. And both houses were up for a re-election, and I got a little tired traveling from city to city to city to meet with family offices, investors, high net worth individuals, and institutional investors that we have in our network. So we started doing events early 2011 to bring them all together at one place. And consequently, the topic of the Jobs Act, before it was created as the Jobs Act, were the topics we discussed. A couple of those Jobs Act bills haven't passed yet, crowdfunding for equity included. At that time, the Jobs Act was created March 8, 2012, when the House of Representatives put it together with 7 different laws underlying it. So almost a year prior to that, we were already talking about the different laws and the different changes that need to be created in the U.S. so small businesses could get capital easier. So we're having 3-4 events a month, and we're discussing capital formation, capital creation, how do you find the money, and what you're allowed to do to reach out to people to get the money. We had then at that point had crowdfunders attend our events, and I decided to put that panel all about crowdfunding on one of our events, and it just exploded because nobody was actually capturing the conversations for crowdfunding for equity specifically at that time. Before I know it, we're having 4 to 6 events a month, and suddenly we're lobbying Congress, we're talking about the different underlying bills of the Jobs Act. And we have David Weil, the former vice chairman of NASDAQ, going down to D.C. and Rocket Hub as well, discussing the different laws that bring pending a vote between the houses. And we get fresh content. Every other week we have fresh content from the Hill on what was asked and discussed under the subcommittees. It was very exciting times. And I got a chance to interview people, just like you're doing right now, Manolis. I got to interview people at my own conferences. I used to pull the bios of everybody coming to my conferences, and I picked maybe 40 people that I wanted to meet. I read their bio, and I would take them out of the audience into a room in the back of my conference and interview them, just like we're doing today. So find out what they want to accomplish, where their dreams are, and what their business was about. So fast forward, we finally get to have an event in LA, March 13 and 14, 2012, and the House of Representatives passed the Jobs Act, and now the Senate was pending a vote on it, and we didn't know if Harry Reid was going to bring it up, speaking of the Senate, to vote it on. And in LA, the two-day event we had, heavily on crowdfunding and equity, we found out through the network that he actually was going to bring it up for vote the following week. It would have taken him another week and a half to pass it with amendments, go back to the House, and then affirm it, pass it as law, and have Obama sign it into law by April 5th, 2012. So we're in the smack middle of all of this excitement, seeing historical new laws passing. Some of them have been discussed for over 10 years, like Reg A, and others relatively new, like crowdfunding for equity, which, by the way, these two laws out of the 7 still have not passed the Jobs Act SSC implementation process.
Absolutely, and that's a good segue, because you gave a lot of great information about the 2012 Jobs Act and how you were intricately involved in each step of the way, getting it to become reality. And in fact, I think for the audience, just so that we can make sure we have a level set, I'd like to play a video released by the White House right on April 5th, 2012, when the bill was signed into law, so that the audience can understand through a video format exactly what equity crowdfunding is. So let me just share my screen for a moment, and we'll play that video. And that's a great segue into our next segment.
Crowdfunding is a concept that's been around for a long time. It's the idea of passing around the basket at church in its oldest incarnation, of a large crowd of people being able to contribute small amounts, which in aggregate meet the financial goal of any organization, group, or individual. And so when you look at crowdfunding and how it's evolved, the reason it's become a buzzword recently is because it's gone online, and so the potential of it has expanded exponentially. The crowdfunding bill is important for small businesses because it creates access to capital. Access to capital that currently is very hard to come by. The basic concept of what this will mean for entrepreneurs and investors is that an entrepreneur will post a description, a very thorough description of their business, the finances, the business plan, what they're going to do with the money, the budget, etc. And they're going to be able to share this opportunity with anyone they so choose. Most likely it'll be their customers, friends and family, might be Twitter followers, people who share an affiliation with them they think might be interested, etc. The investor will then pledge a certain amount of capital if they want to invest. If the fundraising goal is met for how much money that entrepreneur is looking for, then the money will transfer to the entrepreneur. So it's an all or nothing arrangement. What I hope that America will now see is that after the SEC rulemaking period is done on the crowdfunding bill, approximately 9 months from now, and platforms can be created and launched that allow for crowdfunding, that entrepreneurs who currently feel like funding is a roadblock to them achieving their success can now have the opportunity to succeed. I strongly believe that crowdfunding is not just for high-tech businesses. I, in fact, think that the majority of people are going to be using this in the long run. The majority of businesses in the country are small businesses, and that's who can really take advantage of this.
So as you can see, that is a great summary of exactly what this law is all about. And from your perspective, however, as you mentioned, in the Jobs Act that was passed in 2012, there were 7 provisions within the act, and 3 of them were really the equity crowdfunding rules. You mentioned that 2 of them have not been implemented fully yet, but can you tell us more about what has been implemented fully? What is equity crowdfunding today as it stands right now?
Right. Look, we do a lot of work with angel investors and venture capitalists and private equity. And today, when you use the word crowdfunding for equity in the U.S., we have to delineate that because crowdfunding for equity is legal in other countries, but not in the U.S. per se, under what we believe crowdfunding should be. Maybe we should start with definition. For me, crowdfunding is 2 or more people making a payment online towards SPICE. So I'm coming out with a new book called, SPICE, which stands for Service, Project, Product, Investment, Cause, which is a charity, of course, and Experience. And by
Hello, David. Are you still there? I think we might have lost you there. So until we get David back, I believe we might have lost him there momentarily. But as he was saying, the definition of crowdfunding is two or more people putting a certain amount of capital together in order to transact online through multiple individuals making an investment online. And so with this in mind, the video that we just showed too actually had a really good definition as well. When someone asks you what is crowdfunding, the young lady in the previous video mentioned it was something like this. Take the concept of passing around the basket at church, where a group of people contribute to an individual or a business with a need, put that concept online, apply it to things other than charities such as small business, technology, products, services, music, art, and film, and you have crowdfunding. So with that definition in mind, now you're actually able to sell securities, meaning you're able to purchase and make a contribution towards an investment. You can either purchase shares in a privately owned entity or lend that entity capital in the form of debt. And when you actually have that transaction, that contribution, it's no longer a reward. Your reward is now the fact that there could be a return on the shares that you purchased, so dividends on those shares, and it could also be the return on the debt that you loan the company, so the interest rate on that debt. And so that is really what equity crowdfunding has become now, but it's only under the Title II of the 7 titles. As I mentioned, there were 7 titles for equity crowdfunding. 3 of them were specific to the actual equity crowdfunding law, and today the only piece of that law that is 100% set up at the current time is Title II equity crowdfunding. I'm sure David will be joining us again shortly, but I'll go ahead and try to explain what that is for the audience at the moment. So Title II equity crowdfunding allows for the general solicitation of accredited investors. According to the Securities and Exchange Commission, an accredited investor is an individual who makes $200,000 a year or is worth $1 million in net worth, excluding the value of their personal residence. So the investors right now in equity crowdfunding have to be accredited, have to meet this wealth threshold in order to invest in a private company. The great thing for entrepreneurs and startups is, however, they don't have to meet that wealth threshold in order to raise capital for their small business. So in other words, if I have a startup idea and I want to raise capital online through equity crowdfunding, I can post my business online and raise money from wealthy individuals, raise money from the accredited investing crowd, but I am not accredited myself, so it doesn't stop me from raising capital for my own business. So with that being said, while we wait for David to come back, I did have a presentation that I was going to go through later on in the broadcast, but I can actually share my screen now and show the benefits to angel investors and venture capitalists to crowdfunding. So this presentation was given at a venture capital event at MIT, and I will just go through it quickly to show you the benefits to crowdfunding. So crowdfunding as an industry, back in 2009, when crowdfunding really first became popular with Kickstarter, back in 2009, crowdfunding raised about $1 billion a year annually. Flash forward to the end of 2013, that number went to $5.1 billion a year annually, which has accelerated at a growth rate that is astronomical, and it doesn't look like it's slowing down. I was at a New York investing event the other day, and in fact, they believe that at the end of 2014, we might be looking at a $7.1 billion industry when all is said and done. Now, why would a startup want to use crowdfunding? Well, banks and venture capitalists are not investing and lending as they used to. We all know about the Great Recession that happened around 2008, 2009. It's a great way to prove a concept and to get customer validation. If you have a product-oriented company or a service-oriented company, if you're able to raise capital through crowdfunding, doing a donation in exchange for a rewards campaign, you're essentially going to have a better time raising capital in your next round of needs. So you'll be able to show an angel investor or a venture capitalist that indeed there is a proof of your concept and there is customer validation. It also forces you to learn marketing, communications, and business development. What I always tell people who are going through crowdfunding campaigns, you need about 3 to 6 months of pre-planning before you ever launch that campaign. And really, it's a marketing and communications plan that needs to be executed over a 3 to 6 month period in order to successfully raise the capital you need. It forces early adoption of social media and PR. You're going global. The world is your patron. And depending on the type, as I mentioned, rewards crowdfunding, some companies would benefit from not having to give up any equity or take on any debt through that form. Additionally, it gives more power to the startup entrepreneurs. You don't have to make a desperate decision if you know that you can execute a campaign properly. What are the benefits to an angel or a VC? So for an angel investor or a VC, if they see a successfully crowdfunded campaign, they are now effectively eliminating their risk that they previously were in the position to take. If you're an angel or a VC prior to crowdfunding, you had to take that risk. Now the risk is being shifted to the business person to prove that they can actually create this ability.
Using my phone.
So it looks like David Drake is back. Let me see here. David, are you there?
Yes, I'm back. I don't know what happened. I got disconnected from my laptop, so I'm using my my phone instead. It's working.
Perfect. So just to bring you all up to speed, I was going through a brief presentation of the benefits to angels and venture capitalists of crowdfunding, and so I also explained to the audience that the current picture of equity crowdfunding is only Title II equity crowdfunding, which is general solicitation of accredited investors. So now that you're brought up to speed as well, David, can you kind of tell us what the angel investing community and the venture capitalist community is saying about crowdfunding? Are they viewing it as a good thing? Are they saying it's a risk to their business models? Tell us a little bit more about what that community is saying in regards to the crowdfunding model.
Look, they're resistantly embracing it over the last few years, and I was promoting this for crowdfunding for angel networks already in January 2012 to embrace it. What I'm seeing is more in Europe, like in London, and in the, that you have the angels den as well as funding room. I think it's called two groups are using lead investors by angels and allowing crowdfunders to tag along the investment, because the argument is that an angel investor and a VC investor is more sophisticated in the review process and in their picking of as well as underwriting opportunities, but it would go to the crowd to allow crowd investors to tag along and co-invest with them. On the flip side, we're seeing more and more VC firms and angel investors looking at making investments into crowdfunding startups, as well as finding lead generation from companies that are using crowdfunding to raise money online. So you have the platforms that these VCs and angel communities are putting money into, like the Kickstarters of the world, and then you also have new companies and ideas like Pebble Watches. Pebble Watches raised over $10 million in 30 days in May 2012. They walked into my event in Palo Alto, May 9, 2012, winding down their campaign of having raised $10 million for electronic watches that were connected to your cell phone and your iPad. But a year later, Charles River Ventures in January 2013 gave them another $15 million. So, the VCs were using it as a proof of concept, but prior to that, they couldn't even raise $100,000 for the campaign. And I think that continues to happen over and over again. And meanwhile, you're also seeing some of the platforms realizing, hey, this thing raised a lot of money really quickly. Let's cut a deal with Walmart and some of the bigger distribution centers to commercialize this product and take it out of the system online. When you've seen some cases where companies raise millions online and then they match it. I think Crowdfunder just raised $6 million online, but prior to that, the acoustic speaker, I can't remember the name of it, had raised $6 million from donations. And then Crowdfunder matched that with another $6 million or even more online. So you're seeing them working hand in hand to be a proof of concept. And I've told angel investors and VCs for the last 2.5 years, use this as a tool, crowdfunding. If you're not quite sure about investment, you know what? Send it back to the entrepreneur and say, you know what? Prove it to me. Do a crowdfunding campaign and prove it to me that people actually want your product or your service. So we're seeing that inadvertently more and more happening.
Absolutely, David. And in fact, I mean, right now for the audience, I have a slide presentation open, and it says, the benefits to an angel and a VC, and you basically went through all the 4 benefits that I had here. We couldn't have rehearsed this better, because you mentioned that the angels and venture capitalists, they're investing in the crowdfunding ecosystem and in the infrastructure. They're investing in portals. They're investing in service providers, in the technologies. You just mentioned that they should also maintain relations just in case the startup has a great idea. If they validate it through the actual crowdfunding process, then at least they didn't dismiss them completely. They now have the relation to come in and take them to the next level and introduce them to the Walmarts of the world. And then, of course, they have, have you seen any actual angels and VCs investing in a strategy to say, provide us with seed marketing capital so we can execute a crowdfunding campaign? Have you seen certain investors say, listen, we're not going to give you the full amount that you're looking to raise as a startup right this second, but if you need $30,000 to execute a marketing campaign for crowdfunding, we're willing to invest a little bit there. Have you seen that happening?
No, I personally haven't seen that happening. But, I would think that an angel who believes in the product might want to do that to convince his other syndication partners or colleagues or friends to co-invest by doing something like that. But the nice thing is, it's another toolbox, as I said before, that if you make it part of your culture, your corporate culture, to have this and to do these crowdfunding campaigns on an ongoing basis, this is also going to start bleeding into, packaging, look and feel, branding, and giving more power to your consumers and clients to be able to be part of the development process of the product that they want and want to use. We've seen a lot of research from both Edinburgh and from Milano University on what really drives people giving money online. And if it's not, and this is not necessarily for equity, this is just for donation or rewards, the driving force is people that get a chance to be part of the process. They might well be part of the, writing the story or being part of the creative process or be able to sit in on the C-level executive meetings. And people are willing to pay more to be part of a project or a crowdfunding campaign in that manner, as opposed to other incentives that we've seen online. So it just shows that there's a lot of give and take, and we're starting to identify more and more of the benefits of being part of the economic process in crowdfunding. Now, equity, unfortunately, in the early days, as we started the Crowdfunding Association, March 18, actually, 2012, and developed it with a couple of meetings over the last few years, we learned that it was important to be able to outline how long it would take to implement this crowdfunding equity law that's pending still today. Nobody knew in the early days. So I finally decided that, if nobody's going to tell me because nobody knows, I'm going to write an article, which I did in fall 2012, about the process of the SEC. So I could actually, put in on paper what actually has to happen for this to become law. Today, I don't think this is going to become law until early 2016, because even if the SEC does vote on it and pass it, then the FINRA has to do the same thing. And right now, we were hoping that we're going to do something like that in October. We've given up that hope, obviously, and we don't think this is not going to be a vote on this until sometime in the spring 2015. But the process today for the SEC is the following. They have a commenting period, and that commenting period can be up to between 30 to 90 days. And during that period, anybody can actually submit a commenting on a law, and the SEC has to publish it by law. After that, the staff usually takes 30 days to summarize what those comments have been. And then the commissioners, with their 4 commissioners, with the chairman, will sit down and read the summary of those comments
before they decide to have a meeting and vote on it. At that point, when they have the meeting, they can actually then vote on it, and if it passes, it goes into the federal registry about a week later. And 2 months into the federal registry, it becomes law. That's how the process works. Now, if it doesn't get voted in the first time around, it might have to go back for public commenting again, which is another 90 days. In the case of crowdfunding for equity under the Jobs Act, the commenting was for 90 days, but there were over 290 questions that the commission and the SSA had put together, and there were over 680 pages combined discussing what could and could not happen with crowdfunding for equity. Obviously, we know now that summarizing that in 30 days probably did not happen. This is, well, what, 6-7 months after the public commenting had been made, and we still don't have a vote on it. Yeah. So there's always exceptions to the rule, and things can just get delayed for a very long time. So unfortunately, crowdfunding for equity, as we thought would be, we saw Dana there speaking in the White House saying they would be ready in 9 months. Well, it's 2.5 years later, and it's not going to happen for another year and a half from today. That's putting this law coming into implementation 4 years from the fact that we voted on it. Yeah. And got it passed. But back to the question of crowdfunding for equity today, we're using existing laws with the intention of facilitating things online.
Correct, and so just so that the audience will know kind of the piece of this that isn't implemented, as you mentioned, I have a slide up that says Equity Crowdfunding Overview. So the first one on this slide is Title 3. Or rather, the first one on this slide is Title 2, which we discussed already, which is the General Solicitation of Accredited Investors. Title 3 is the one that everyone's really waiting for, and in fact, in 2 days, it'll be the 1-year anniversary that the proposed rules were released. On October 23rd, 2013, that's when the really exciting piece of this got set up, which is the General Solicitation of Unaccredited Investors. And so instead of only a pool of 8.7 million individuals who meet the wealth guidelines of an accredited, there's only 8.7 million people who make over $200,000 a year or have net worth over $1 million in the U.S. Soon it'll be over 110 million households who qualify for unaccredited investing, and that's why everyone's really excited. It's set to create a lot of small businesses in the United States. If more businesses have access to capital, then there's going to be more businesses being started, more businesses expanding, and that's really why everyone's really excited and waiting for it. But as David mentioned, what should have been implemented, at least by now, it doesn't appear that Title III will be 100% finalized until early 2015. And then finally, Title IV, same thing. It's probably going to be, mid-2015 until Title IV gets implemented, because that was after Title III. So I'd imagine they're going to go in order, but that's not necessarily the case. Is everything?
Yeah, Manolis.
Yes.
Can you hear me, Manolis?
Yeah, I can hear you.
People can't relate to Title II, 3, and 4.
Right.
People need to understand the difference and have it in front of them. Lawyers and you and me, we get that because we're so knee-deep into it. But 99.99% of the rest of the U.S. are not familiar with those those 3 titles. So, Title III you're referring to is, no, I can't even remember which one is which. Why don't you tell me which one is which again?
Sure. Yeah, Title III was is the General Solicitation of Unaccredited Investors. So anyone, regardless of income, will be able to invest in a private company up to certain annual investment limits, and the startup can only raise up to $1 million a year in capital per year. That's the Title III, and then
that's the crowdfund, right? That's the crowdfunding equity law.
Correct. And then Title 4 is the Regulation A. It's the expansion of an old rule that is allowing for up to $50 million in capital raised. And what everyone's really excited about this Title 4, this Regulation A, is that it allows for both accredited and unaccredited, and it also allows for the elimination of the old blue sky laws, where instead of having to go state to state to get a capital raise approved, It'll just be, on the federal level, and you don't need to go state to state to actually raise the capital. It'll be, if they release the final rules in that capacity.
Well, the proposal that came out December 4th says that the federal level would supersede state level. And this regulation actually died because the states didn't understand it. They had turnover, and it was an old archaic law, and it was inefficient. And I did an interview of Godspell, who had raised $5 million in 2011 or 12, and it was one of the last Reg A campaign, races that were done. It cost him a lot of money, a lot of headaches, and took a very long time. $250,000 in legal fees was what he had to pay. To me, I wrote about this 2 years ago, and I said Reg A is the true crowdfunding, that even better than the crowdfunding law that were pending, because you can take up to $5 million today from anybody, as long as you apply for those states and take money from those states. The new law is saying, well, why don't we just forget the state-by-state approval, and I just say you get one approval from the SEC, and you can raise up to $50 million from anybody, no matter how rich or poor they are. And that's why, to me, that's a bigger law than the crowdfunding for equity law.
Sure, and I would say that it would be, except the old Reg A was not used very often because of the state-by-state requirements. So, from what I understand, Fundrise was just at an event. They're a real estate crowdfunding portal. They actually had spent $500,000 in compliance fees to raise $300,000 on their real estate crowdfunding portal, because they had to go through all the different states to raise capital for this. And so if you have to go state by state and create all these different, public offering documents and have to wait all this time to get it approved, if that new law still has that requirement, then to me it's dead in the water, just like the old Regulation A. The point is, you want to have one document that applies throughout the United States. Otherwise, you're taking a long time to actually raise the capital, and you're incurring all these legal fees, and by the time it's said and done, it's not even worth doing.
Fundrise, Ben Miller and his brother, they're called the Wonder Kids, the Wonder Brothers, mainly because they spent so much money doing this archaic law to prove a point. Now, it only passed in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. Maryland just recently, because it didn't pass last year. So they only got the Reg A approved in 3 states. And you're right, they had to go through the state legislation, and then because nobody understood anything. The state doesn't understand something, they'll just send you a letter asking for more questions, and nothing really happens. What people don't understand is the Reg A, whether the new regulation passes or not, as of today, you have to own the property to do crowdfunding, or Reg A as we call it, not crowdfunding. Technically, you have to own the real estate before you go out and raise money. So for real estate, that regulation is not ideal, because the whole point is to raise money to buy the property. But this regulation indicates that you have to own the company or the startup that you are going to raise money for, as opposed to the real estate that Fundrise was doing. So they got the nickname Wonder Brothers because they had to own the real estate. Then they go and do a tiny little raise just to build awareness, and they spent more money on legal fees than money they raised. Fortunately enough for them, they're from a well-to-do real estate conglomerate. The father took a couple of malls public for $500 million, so they're in a good position, having some fantastic relationships nationwide to bring awareness to this. So they've done a really, really good job in that aspect. And everybody in the real estate crowdfunding space, and when we say real estate crowdfunding today, that's using Reg D, the old law, allowing you to raise money online to the public, but you can only take money from rich people or wealthy individuals. So it becomes very intricate and very complicated because we're abusing the word crowdfunding now. But back to the original question, what is happening with crowdfunding for equity? They're using existing laws to do that, but they're not using the crowdfunding laws intended to be for everybody, only for people that are wealthy. And when we talk about accredited, I don't know if you covered that while I was disconnected, but accredited, did you cover that already, Manolis?
Yep, we did. We already mentioned what that is, the wealth threshold, and what that means to be accredited.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And they're talking about changing the requirement for that. Hopefully, they'll make it easier by changing it. So, we've seen some letters go to the SEC asking them to make it easier, not more complicated.
Absolutely, and we do have a couple questions, so I want to get to those real quick before we move on. This is from Eric Kaufman, and this is a question relating to kind of the preparation for a startup to go through before crowdfunding. So he asks, is the same 6-month pre-funding time frame still applicable for a company seeking funding via the equity funding platform? So I'm not sure if you saw this, David, but the question relates to a slide that I showed that says if you're doing a donation in exchange for rewards-based crowdfunding campaign, you need about 3 to 6 months of pre-planning to execute, an appropriate marketing and communications plan for crowdfunding before you ever launch. Is there still a need to do that type of pre-planning for an equity crowdfunding campaign? Is there an emphasis more on marketing, or does the emphasis of pre-planning more so go to investor outreach and preparing for the legal side of things? What would you say to that?
I would probably say that you need more than 3 months. The secret to crowdfunding today, to me, is you need to find 20 bloggers that will listen to you and have at least 500,000 readers each, and then decide to write about you the week you launch. That's it. You get those 20 bloggers to do that, of that size, you'll have a successful campaign, and you can raise potentially millions. But when it comes to equity, you have compliance issues. You have to be compliant with FINRA, and we don't know what FINRA's going to decide. They haven't even got the law yet from the SEC to have anything to decide on. And then you have to be compliant with SEC, FINRA, and then you have to also do your accounting work. You have to have your documents in a row. You have to have so there's a lot more legal requirements and compliance requirements for equity. So it's obviously going to take more time, and you're going to have to be more detail-oriented. And there's topics that entrepreneurs don't care about or know about anything about at all, such as investor communication. How are you going to communicate with your investors, and what should you communicate, and why should you care? Entrepreneurs don't have that experience, so they don't do it at all. I've told maybe 1,000 entrepreneurs, put them on your newsletter. 2 out of those 1,000, the last 3 years, did. They don't understand communication, building a relationship, building a rapport. We have magazines, and we write magazines, and I write articles for over 55 different publications. Why do I do that? There's a communication of my knowledge, and also education of what I know, but also people reading it on a regular basis are on a regular basis seeing my name out there, and I'm building a rapport indirectly with them. And when I need their help, it'll be easier for me to reach them because they're already listening to me. And that's what the newsletter does. So a lot of these pieces in corporations that are in place, like corporate communication, is not, are things that are not being planned for crowdfunders, for equity. You have to have those lined up in a row. Seed Invest and Crowdfunder are doing crowdfunding for equity today, and they have these tools allowing them to communicate with their investor groups on a regular basis. You got to remember, the argument is it takes 8 times more energy to get your first customer as opposed to keeping them. So if you have them listening to you, create a relationship communication tool, newsletters, articles, or internal corporate communication tool that these platforms like Seed Invest has in place already. Crowd Alliance is another platform. Now they have a broker-dealer license as opposed to using other broker-dealer licenses, so that makes them a little more unique versus Crowdfunder and Seed Invest. But Crowd Alliance is a new platform that's out there who's allowing people to invest in early-stage companies. But they have an advantage because they are their own broker-dealers, so they are compliant with FINRA and SEC. And they're using existing laws to operate.
Absolutely. And
so, yes, the answer to the question is probably more like 4 to 6 months, and you definitely have to have a lot more knowledge about security law. We said this 2.5 years ago. Crowdfunders, stop yelling. You guys can't even, nobody could explain to me how the process SEC worked, so I found out myself. Same thing happened was that this is now a security issue. It's not a technology disruptive issue anymore. You have to deal with the laws of today. And I'll give you an example. Airbnb and Lyft are 2 companies that's disrupting business globally. But Airbnb is breaking. Well, they're not breaking the law, but they're enabling you to rent out your bedroom, and you're technically committed doing a commercial business in a residential zone. So Airbnb is enabling to break the law by allowing individuals to operate businesses of a technically hotel business in residential property, and that's why they're having so much trouble in New York. And I don't blame them having trouble. I want them to have trouble because I've been living in New York on and off for the last 18 years, and I certainly don't want to see suitcases coming into my building when I'm tired coming back from work. It's a small island, so we don't want to see that. So that's why they're getting in trouble, and they're finally getting smart and saying, well, Uber's getting smart, and they're saying, well, yeah, we're enabling to breaking the laws for taxi medallions and people use cars. Maybe we should start lobbying Congress and get the laws changed or adjusted. So what we're doing is not enabling breaking the law. The same thing's going on here. It's a security issue. It's a legal issue that needs to be dealt that way. And I think the startups in Silicon Valley are realizing that now and looking at it a little differently, slowly.
Absolutely, David. That was a great summary. And Eric, I hope that answered your question. I will say this, just from what I see from my end of the spectrum, if you're raising equity through crowdfunding in the current method, which is really through Title II, which is the general solicitation of the accredited investors, many of these websites have their own database. So when you list on their platform, there's not so much promotion that is needed on the startup's end because they're promoting you to their list. But when these unaccredited investor platforms come up, Title III, the one where anyone, regardless of income, will be able to invest, that'll be a lot more like the crowdfunding model of Kickstarter because it'll be up to the startup to really market themselves in that way. Before we go on to the next question, and this will be a good lead-in, there is a very important part of the equity side, though, and that's what we'll get into soon with David. You may not be marketing, let's say, on social media as much for this equity investment, but going to events and pitching in front of investors that Soho Loft has in their database is part of the whole roadshow element. But let me get to one more question before we head into Soho Loft. We have a gentleman named Jim, and Jim, I'm not sure if we're qualified to answer this question, but we'll try. Are you familiar with people doing contract terms such as revenue sharing for companies that do not plan on a liquidity event, i.e. a company looking to build organically in longevity? So I'm wondering if this is a question to say, are there royalty-based crowdfunding models where there's the ability for an investor to invest on the future cash flows as opposed to banking on a liquidity event? Are you familiar with any royalty-based crowdfunding models?
Yeah, AppsBacker is one of them, and it's been around for several years. And there are other out there too. When we were doing the crowdfunding association that we put together in early 2013, and we had the first meeting with the SEC, that year we saw reports from Mass Solution, which is crowdsourcing.org, that there were 4 major areas of crowdfunding: donations, which is charities; rewards like Kickstarter, you get something for it; equity; and debt. What you're referring to right now is the 5th one. Revenue sharing is part of it. Profit sharing, revenue sharing. And I looked at different platforms all over the world trying to use these. And it's a clever way of saying, instead of you having equity or debt, we'll give you part of the revenue in the future, or profit of the in the future, or gross net income, depending on how you want to look at it. And I'll give you an example. I like this one from AppsBacker that happened several years ago, where you created a mobile app, and if you want to be clever about the mobile app, you can do something like, well, I'm going to create this mobile app. If you give me $100, I'll give you 10% of the revenue for anybody downloading the app with a 415 area code. So it's a very clever way of doing revenue sharing, a limited time period by area code on the phone. So, that's a very clever way of taking this revenue sharing and dividing it up into even more areas.
Yeah, that's geolocating investors. That's actually really interesting by area code. That's a genius model, actually.
Yeah.
Great. So that answers that question. Jim Flannery, thank you so much. So now let's get back to the events that you do, because I'm sure you see a lot of startups, whether they be actual crowdfunding platforms, whether they be entrepreneurs with technology products. A lot of people come to your company, Soho Loft, to gain exposure to that venture capital and angel community. So going back to the question by Eric Kaufman, there is a lot of pre-prep, and part of the process is, how am I going to get myself in front of people who have the capital to invest in my startup? And so Soho Loft and your company, I guess you could tell us, tell us a little bit about how that works with you. Why do startups come to your company? And you could also roll into what the event's going to be on November 13th in New York as well. So give us the importance of having to pitch in front of a captive audience of venture capitalists and angels.
Well, look, you can raise the money through crowdfunding, whether it's donation or equity under the existing laws, or you can go and pitch investors, and obviously that's going to be business angel investors or venture capitalists. We get involved with about 50 venture capitalists and angel investor events a year in North America, and we bring 10 to 20 different venture capitalists to that event, and you can see their bios on our website. The website would be the Soho Loft, and you can see their bios, which firm they're with, and we probably had at least 90-95% of all the venture capital organizations in North America at our events over the last few years. They go there because they want to see opportunities and they want to be able to source opportunities, and an inexpensive way to get close or face-to-face with hard to reach venture capitalists and angel investors. The nice part is you see their bio, so you know what they invested in the past, and you can do your due diligence before you even buy a ticket. The other part of it is, the November 13 event we're doing is going to be heavily focused on real estate and natural resources, oil and gas specifically. There hasn't been much in crowdfunding in these areas. Well, in real estate there's been a lot more momentum, but oil and gas less so. So we're going to be discussing what's happening and what could possibly happen in that area. Oil and gas has been one of the most common fraud areas of people raising money and running away with it for the last few decades. So it's something that the states are very concerned about, fraudulent scenarios. But the beauty of crowdfunding is there's more transparency online. If you find somebody online and they have no friends on Facebook or no relationships on LinkedIn, well, shame on you if you're investing in them. Most of the fraud happens one-on-one. Hey, do this deal, and then the money's gone and the person's gone. But online, there's more transparency, and it's easier to detect somebody, quicker to do the due diligence. And also, you get burnt online, well, then everybody online will know it.
Absolutely, and that leads to a lot of new opportunities too for startup companies who might want to provide services to investors. I think that's a big area where a lot of people they're focusing either on the startups or the funding platforms. But as far as education is concerned, I think investor education is going to be a big market and opportunity for people to really educate investors to say, here's what you should look out for. This is what a good financial statement looks like. These are the things that are red flags. So you're right. I mean, fraud happens because people don't do their due diligence.
But look. I would also say that Crowd Alliance, Crowdfunders, Seed Invest are three firms today that are doing crowdfunding under the existing laws. You have to be accredited to be able to get on the platform, and then you can look at the opportunities. They're streamlining these processes online to make it more, make the process easier to create, cost less money, and be more efficient. For an entrepreneur that wants to raise money, if you want to see what it takes to be a real company, you should work with a company like that. They have these processes in place. They have the newsletters, the communication tools, the reports, the expectations, and a process for you to see what you need to put together. That's a great way for you to educate yourself by going through a process like that if you've never done it before. If you've done it before, then you know the process, and people invest in you faster because they've seen you succeed. A lot of things that I look at in an investment is, have they had an exit before? If the team have had an exit before, that means they know how to raise money, they know how to exit and sell or get acquired. and they know how to make money for the investors. That's extremely valuable today, especially after a great financial crisis.
Absolutely.
And if they don't have that, then you have to look at, well, what's the likelihood that this is disruptive or recurring revenue, and how long have the team known each other, or how competent are the team, or are they flexible enough to know what they don't know and let somebody else come in. I mean, we all of us investors, we've always had that experience with a crazy professor who will never let go of the project and will kill the project because he just can't let go. And that's a deal killer for us.
Absolutely, and I mean, and you raise a very good point. I mean, you know, just a disclaimer on, you know, this isn't a general solicitation for investment on our show. I'm just trying to bring forth an example that you mentioned. Seed Invest does have a very good due diligence process. I know last week that Patch of Land recently announced that they're going to be raising capital using that platform. So Patch of Land is a real estate crowdfunding platform. They've been on our show previously, and they're actually using an equity crowdfunding portal to sell equity in their own company. So it's a really interesting model that a crowdfunding platform is crowdfunding on another crowdfunding platform for equity. But the one thing that I've been hearing is that the due diligence is so good, and that these equity crowdfunding platforms do a good job of curating the deals because they don't want to just put anybody on their platform, that part of the risk is mitigated, but it still doesn't. Ultimately, the investor still has to make that decision. So it's still very important that they understand everything and they understand the risks, because even if all risks are disclosed, you have to really understand, you know, what is the likelihood of this risk happening, and what would be the impact on my investment if the risk actually comes to fruition. So it's really an interesting world out there, David.
Now that just proves the point that, you know, Patch of Land does real estate debt. And their investors put money into, you know, giving, let's say, a construction firm who bought a piece of land and who wants to improve the property needs to get a short-term loan. And that's what they do. They give short-term loans to developers or somebody who's going to improve a real estate property. And now they're selling equity of their own business, most likely on Seed Invest.
Yeah.
So it's a crowdfunding equity platform using crowdfunding equity platform to raise money for their own platform while still operating and doing loans and giving people money for real estate. So yes, I didn't know that, and that's great news. But that just goes to show also that we have a lot longer of a journey to go before people are aware of crowdfunding. I mean, I still see people. I saw people today. I saw somebody today who never heard of Kickstarter or crowdfunding. So we take it for granted that everybody knows. No. There's still a majority of the U.S. population who have never ever heard of these companies or these solutions. So we need to continue educating. And that's the goal of my media company, the Soho Loft. The media company is to educate, to get people exposed, get them to the conferences, write articles, write about these laws, and educate people everywhere we can, because we barely scratch the surface. 99.99% of the world population has no clue about crowdfunding even exists.
Absolutely.
We'd like to get to 1% within the next few years.
Absolutely, and you know, just to give you an old personal example of that, I mean, you know, you may have the circles in the know, you know, education institutions, finance, technology. They might know more than the general population. But I actually went to a Starbucks coffee house when I first started Reality Crowd TV, and we did an informal video poll with my GoPro camera, and I asked 8 people, you know, have you ever heard of crowdfunding? Have you ever heard of Kickstarter? And 7 out of 8 people had never heard of either term. So, you know, it's amazing how much more education there is. The fact that it's growing so quickly on an annual basis and there's still the majority of the world who doesn't know about it means that this is going to catch a lot of people off guard. It's going to disrupt so many industries. And speaking of that, this is a good segue to ask for your opinion. You know, as one of the elite people in this industry, the one in you know, who's in front of this, who knows about the equity crowdfunding laws, who knows about the traditional capital raising laws, you know, what is your prediction for the future? Where do you see crowdfunding going 5 or 10 years from now? What are your predictions?
5 years from today, it will get so blurry because online syndication under existing laws and crowdfunding will merge, and you will barely be able to tell the difference. The new law from September 23rd allowing you to advertise, but only taking money from accredited rich people, that automation process online is unstoppable, and it's another explosion in opportunities, just like we saw websites. In 1993, we had 633 websites, if you check Wikipedia. A couple of years later, AOL go public. There was an explosion of websites. So as this new law and the automation of online transactions, which is of course going to hurt lawyers, well, not hurt, but it's going to take money out of their mouth, because I've had my fair share of 100 copies being charged to me for $200, $300 from a law firm. Those things are going to disappear, and things are going to become more efficient on the cost of using lawyers and legal fees and compliance. And that automation process with crowdfunding will all merge and become a very powerful movement all in one 5 years from now. And that's why we will be able to say that crowdfunding might reach $1 trillion by 2025. Because right now when you do crowdfunding today under the existing laws, well, poor people in the U.S. can't invest. People who are not wealthy in the UK can, as well as in Finland. They don't have that requirement on income. So we're also going to see an emergence of country laws coming together too. Like the European Union is trying to come up with a crowdfunding law for the European Union. But I wrote an article 2 years ago. It's going to take them a minimum 1,000 days to get a law implemented. It's taken us more than that soon. We're going to surpass 1,000 days from the law being signed into law and actually becoming law. So there's a process in place. It's lethargic, but it's there for a purpose. And we're all working hard to push this through. And currently, at the SSC, it's boggled with challenges. But you know what? Mary Jo White, who was hired to take care of Dodd-Frank and the Jobs Act, she still has 47 outstanding issues with the Dodd-Frank, which is older than the Jobs Act. So there are priorities, and they're like any other startup. As you see company grow, after a few years, you have 200-300 projects standing in line for the marketing department. It's just inevitable. Every organization, corporations have things that has to be done in a certain process, and we're in that process right now, and we're working hard to make that become law. And I'm partaking by educating, like you are, sharing, talking, and letting people know what's happening on a global basis.
Absolutely, and again, David, it's been a pleasure to have you on our show. The audience was in for a great presentation today. It will be recorded automatically on YouTube, so anyone who did miss this, it'll be recorded on YouTube. I'd like to give you kind of the last word, David, and then I will close out the show for the day. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and please, any last words you'd like to tell the audience?
Yeah, you know what, audience? Email 3 of your friends today that you don't think know that much about crowdfunding, and ask them to share this video with 3 of their friends. That's what I'm asking the audience to do.
You're a good man, David. Thank you. And great. So everyone, thank you again. The audience, thank you for joining us. We hope you received a lot of benefit from this and you get a better understanding of where equity crowdfunding is today. And until next time, dream it, believe it, achieve it. Thank you.